Okay, so today we're going to talk about development, and I'm going to try something new because I've heard a couple of you say that your browser doesn't really support the Collaborate videos very well. So I'm going to try something new. You guys let me know if it works for you or not. Um, Maybe not super ideal, but I'm always willing to try something new to see if we can get it to work better. Okay, so development. We're going to cover a lot in a little snapshot today. So it's not going to give us a lot of in-depth information per se about development, but hopefully just kind of that, 10,000 foot view. Okay, so when we look at the life stages, when we think about lifespan, we look at the stages. So we have prenatal, which is considered generally conception to birth, infancy, birth to 2 years, childhood 2 to 12 years, adolescence 12 to 18, young adulthood 18 to 40, middle adulthood 40 to 65, late adulthood 65 years and over, and then there's been added a very late adulthood section that's usually considered to be about 85 and on or so. Now, these stages are not completely rigid. Some people do define them a little bit different, but this is a good general way to think of these life stages and how they are generally speaking divided up. So, I know we all know this one, right? This is a quick, just little snapshot of, or quick little snapshots of different stages of development, right? So we have, prenatal development, and the baby in the womb still, little fingers folded in, learning and sensing. The brain is growing so much in the womb. There's so much that's developing. They're already learning voices and music. There's already so much going on. A lot of people think that it's not until humans are born that they really start to learn and grow and feel and develop, and it's just not true. We have tons and tons and tons of research that supports it, that humans are growing and developing and learning and figuring stuff out very early on in the womb. And then of course we have a little child who's learning about finger painting and the exciting world of tactile, right, and colors, and so much new in the world. And we have an adolescent, we have young adulthood, we have middle adulthood, late adulthood, right? So we have all this, the stages, the wonderful, beautiful, vibrant stages of the human experience. Piaget, right? We're going to hear a lot about Piaget. Let's learn a little bit about him, a snapshot. So, sensory motor is the first stage that he called. He did a lot of his research actually on his own children. But his research wasn't, like bad research. He really just observed them and played with them. So I always think he must have been a really cool dad. Sensory motor is birth to 2 years, and this is when they use their senses, right? So feeling, putting things in their mouth, right? Using the senses and their motor abilities, getting places, hitting things, to learn about the world and develop object permanence. And of course, if anybody who's been with little kids at all totally understands this, right? Little kid will pick something up. Little kid will bang it together. Little kid will bang it on the floor. Little kid might bang it into the head and be like, oh, that hurts. I don't want to do that again. Little kids are all about crawling and moving, and oh, maybe I can't move, but I can grab this chair and I can move this chair. And they're all into those things. And learning about object permanence, that's recognition that something is still there even when you can't see it. So you can see that, if you're playing with a little kid who's like 3 months old, they may not have developed object permanence yet. So you hide a ball, and okay, the ball's gone. Ball's all gone. You play that same game with a kid when they're 13 months old, 14 months old. They know that ball is just under that blanket, and they'll lift the blanket up because they realize it's not gone just because they can't see it, because they've developed object permanence. Pre-operational, 2 to 6 years. They use symbolic thinking to understand the world. They remain egocentric and have hindered logical thinking. Now, symbolic thinking, a way to remember that is think that this is usually the prime time for cartoons and animation where animals talk and fables and things like that, because that's all symbolic thinking. Now, symbolic thinking does not mean bad thinking. What it really means is that they're understanding symbols, which are representations of larger truths. So what they're doing is they're taking symbols to understand bigger things. So they're really building up their complexity, right? They understand this symbol, and so they're using this symbol, and they're building things up to get to larger and larger and larger complexities. They remain egocentric, but egocentric here doesn't mean what it, sometimes means like, oh, that person's so egocentric, they're so selfish, they're not narcissist. It doesn't really mean that when we're talking about the pre-operational stage. What it really just means is that they see things from their own perspective, and they maybe not really recognize yet that there's other perspectives. So they might approach somebody and they say, why weren't you at my birthday party yesterday? And they just met the person, 5 seconds ago. So, well, we would recognize, well, 5 seconds ago, that person didn't know you, they didn't know it was your birthday, like, why would they come to your birthday party? But from the other, from the little kid standpoint, they knew it was their birthday, they like you, why didn't you come, right? Because everything is really from their perspective, right? They're not recognizing that there's other people. So again, it doesn't really have a selfish per se tone, it really just means they're seeing things from their perspective and only from their perspective. And then hindered logical thinking. And there can be different things that hinder the logical thinking, but really it's that connection of recognizing that A causes B that causes C, and understanding how all that progresses. Now they're working on it, right? With their symbolic thinking, they're working on developing this ability, but in the pre-operational stage, they don't quite have it down yet. And then concrete operational is 6 to 12 years. Operations for logical thinking are about concrete events, so maybe not so philosophical, but very concrete events. They understand conservation, right? That's the kind of the classic experiment with, you've got a really tall bottle of water with liquid in it, you got a really short, fat, stubby bottle of water, and they actually both have 5 milliliters in it. So when you're older, you recognize, okay, 5 milliliters is 5 milliliters, they have the same amount of liquid. But when you're younger, you don't recognize conservation, right? So the one that's taller is the one that has more to you, and then when it gets dumped into the short, squatter one, all of a sudden it has less, right? Because that ability, recognition of conservation hasn't been developed yet. And then in concrete operational, they also cannot reason abstractly yet. So again, remember, concrete operational, it's kind of in that name, right? They're very concrete, they're very black and white. So they're starting to understand logic, right? They're starting to understand some of the fundamentals of logic. A causes B causes C. They're starting to understand that. They're not able to necessarily think abstractly. So a lot of their understanding of consequences and of logic have to do with things that have directly applied to them or that they've directly experienced themselves. So it may not be that they're going to really be able to look into the future and say, oh, if I was to do this when I was 20, then, etc., etc. Now, it is important to remember that these stages, and there's another stage we'll talk about in just a second, these stages are not necessarily rigid for everybody, and that there's also a lot of research that says, oh, these stages may not actually even be as well defined as Piaget said in the first place. However, there is a lot of research that does support this general growth factor. It could be different. Some of you may have gone into concrete operational when you were 5. That would be rare, but it could definitely happen. And then some people might not, really gotten out of concrete operational to formal operational until maybe, honestly, they were like 16 or 17, 18 years old. So don't look at it as rigid. Look at it as more of a progression. I'm sharing these with you so that you know the original dates and how Piaget broke them up. Okay, so the last stage is formal operational, 12 years through adulthood, and this is the ability, when they develop the ability to engage in abstract thinking and hypothetical deductive reasoning, right? So this is where Sherlock would really shine, right? So this is when the ability to be able to deal with things, understand things, deal with complexities of things that are not just right in front of them, but understanding, applying principles, thinking out, thinking further. Okay, so there are some new dangers that are rearing their ugly heads, and when we look at lifespan development, sometimes confounding the research, but definitely things that in general the field is very interested in learning more about right now. So I'm just going to cover them. I'm just going to say right now, very controversial, but my point of bringing them up right now is for you guys to think about them. What you think about them, I hope is informed by research and not just like opinion and what's easiest. And please don't let your opinions about these things be informed by like the loudest talking head on the TV right now, right? Let it be informed by real research. There's a lot of research about these topics, so let it be informed by that. Of course, keep in mind, and we'll talk about this in the research lecture, that do pay attention to who's paying for the research you're reading. Because surprise, surprise, if the research is being paid for by the very group that makes a ton of money off of what that research is saying, well then maybe we should be a little bit suspicious about what that research is saying, right? Okay, so these are just some new dangers. So toxins have certainly always been in the environment. In a lot of ways, we have fewer toxins than we have had in the past. There's a lot of toxins we don't have in our modern society that we've eliminated or reduced. However, there are some new toxins that have come up that we don't know as much about. So, for instance, like water. A lot of our water is, it's got fluoride in it, or that's added, or it's got other chemicals in it that added, or it might have things in it that have leached into it through chemical offputs, or maybe like GMOs and Roundup. Some of these things that we have some research to suspect cause some difficulties with birth defects, some mutations of genes, some other things, but these are kind of new. We haven't really experienced these for very long, so we're still kind of figuring out how do they affect us. We do know, for instance, that girls' puberty, on average, girls are getting puberty about 5 years earlier than they did about 30 years ago. We suspect that has to do with artificial hormones in our meat and our milk and all those kinds of things, but we're still doing research on it to learn more about that. Screens and tech. So not only do screens and tech give off EMF, electromagnetic frequencies, which some research indicates could cause higher anxiety, potentially cause problems with fertility and other things, but also we know how blue light, which is emitted from these screens, can affect our sleep-wake cycles, our circadian rhythms. We're aware of how, clicking on things, how it affects our brains, like dopamine hits. So there's a lot of different things. And not to mention, screens and texts have a negative effect upon children learning social skills, learning language. It's been fairly well established that it's just a bad idea to have kids younger than 2 exposed to screens and media, really at all. If you need to do a video call with family in order for them to see grandma, and that's the only way they can see grandma, that's probably okay. That the research is indicating, but really they shouldn't be watching TV. They shouldn't be entertained by TV. They shouldn't be doing that. It cuts off neural pathways for them. So we're learning the things because actually some of you guys, you might have been raised by your kids by your parents with a lot more screen tech, because that's kind of when screens and tech were really coming up, but we didn't really have the research yet to say, oh, this is really not good for human brains when they're so young. So some of you were in a weird situation because you were raised with more of it, and now our research is saying, yeah, but maybe you shouldn't raise your kids that way. So it's kind of a weird thing, right? Because it's like, well, I'm fine, but there's some very, very interesting research about how it affects the brain, and I would encourage you to look into it. And then vaccines, right? So the rate of vaccines has increased dramatically since, I think it was 1983. The CDC, with not any real research, has, I think, tripled the amount of vaccines that children in this country take. Other first world countries like Sweden and other countries like that have not increased their vaccine rates at the rates we have. And interestingly enough, while we've been increasing our rates of vaccines, we've actually been seeing an increase of chronic illnesses as well. So it's not making us healthier. There's really no stat of it making us healthier. So that's another one of those things to look into, that, because it's very controversial. People, you bring up vaccines and they're very much in one camp or another, and no one really wants to talk about it, look at the research. But I would really encourage you guys, look at the research. It's very compelling. And again, look who pays for the research, because if a study comes out showing that vaccines are completely safe, but it's paid for Johnson & Johnson, who makes billions of dollars a year off of vaccines, then maybe, follow the money, right? Daycare. So daycare is another thing that's kind of new to our society. It hasn't been super common for non-relational people that are non-related to kids to have some role in their upbringing for pay throughout society. But it's really, really new that children will spend most of their waking hours, more than 50% of the kids in this country spend most of their waking hours with people who are being paid to care for them. So not family members, not people who are doing it because of their love and attention and care, but because they're being paid. And certainly there are some people who need daycare. So again, this is a very controversial topic, but again, we see the research. Kids that are raised by daycare, which again means the daycare is with them more than 50% of their waking hours, They tend to have a lot of problems. They tend to have more behavioral problems. They act out more. They tend to they tend to be more violent. Criminal records, problems with social interaction. They learn how to curse earlier, things like that. So there are a lot of different things to consider with daycare. Daycare is one of those things that, generally speaking, it's not the best thing. It's not, I mean, but that's not surprising, right? I mean, I think if we were in any other society saying like, hey, it's better for somebody who unconditionally loves a kid to raise them than somebody who, yeah, likes them maybe, hopefully, and is paid minimum wage to take care of them. So daycare is another thing. It's causing a lot of demographic and kind of cohort effects that we're seeing on lifespan development. And then no play. We also, kind of like a mix of all these things, right? We're seeing kids not play as much. And play is hugely developmentally important for kids. How their brains develop, how their emotions develop, how social relatedness develops. I read a study a few years ago that said the average kid, and I'm going to hope this is not true about a kid in Alaska or Texas or something like that. I'm hoping there are some, states exceptions to this, but the average kid didn't touch dirt all day. They went from their home, they walked on their driveway to their car, then they got on their sidewalk of their school, walked into their school and played on their concrete playground, and then they got back into their school, they got back into their car, they came back to their home, and they never even touched dirt their entire day. And that's very sad to me. That's very tragic. We're going to look a little bit into the consequences of not having play as well. So these are just a couple of the new things that the field is looking into and how they affect development. Okay, so pretend play, like I said, we're going to look into this. So for those of you who don't know, I'm a registered play therapist and supervisor. So pretend play is a very important thing to me. We're going to cover it a little bit just because it does factor in as one of these lifespan new toxins. We're going to cover this pretty briefly though. Okay, so since 1955, children's free play time has been decreasing, interestingly enough. 85% of parents report their children play outside less than they did, right? So this means that most parents say, hey, I played more outside when I was a kid than my kids are playing outside. There's a video here. I'll try to cut and paste it for you guys to watch. A 2010 study indicates that children's creativity is decreasing. Now, whether or not this is directly linked or not, I'm not saying that research says this. However, one of the things we do know is that free play helps children's creativity. With less play, children are less humorous, less imaginative, less able to elaborate on ideas, and they're more narrow-minded in their thinking. They look at things from one perspective, one point of view, and that's it. They're not able to develop things and build on things and really expand things as much. Research indicates a strong positive correlation between pretend play and social competence. So positive correlation means as one increases, the other increases as well, and as one decreases, the other decreases as well. So there's a strong positive correlation between pretend play and social competence, meaning more and more pretend play leads to more and more social competence. Okay, so tech. Let's spend a minute talking about tech. Okay, so there's diminishing empathy from increased dependency on tech and a reduction of direct human interaction. And of course, this has only increased during the pandemic. And we see this a lot, right? We see that some people, there's been a reduced human interaction. And so a lot of people are very empathetic, very not empathetic to other people. They'll ridicule people and they'll attack people and they'll immediately think this person's a bad person or this person's a good person or whatever, just because like something as simple as wearing a mask or not. That's not really like a valid way to know somebody whether or not somebody's a good or bad person. But for a lot of people, that's a response that shows no empathy, right? You have no empathy for somebody. They did this X, they did this. That's it. That's the end of the story. End of story. And that's really something that is very black and white, narrow-minded thinking, right? I have one tiny piece of information, therefore I can decide everything else about this person, right? And so that narrow-minded thinking really shows diminished empathy because of reduction of human interaction. So that's just like one example of how we can kind of see this on a global scale right now. And so, of course, imagine this on a smaller scale for kids in general, right? For that they're supposed to be building all this social connectedness, but if they're too plugged into tech, this is actually being decreased. What are the consequences for when they're adults? What are the consequences to the world when they're adults? Multitasking undermines the capacity for sustained attention and deep thinking. 6.5 hours of use a day, 2/3 of multitasking. So 6.5 hours a day, 6.5 hours of use in a day was the average, and this I think was from 10 years ago. It's in my reference slides, but this was a while ago. I would guess that this is more now. And 2/3 of that time are multitasking. So basically what multitasking is when you're not doing actually multiple things. If it's using the same parts of your body, you're not actually doing multiple things. What you're doing is you're flitting back and forth between them, which actually means instead of actually doing 5 things well, you're doing 5 things probably pretty poorly. And you may not even recognize it. You may think that you're multitasking. There was an experiment that was done a few years ago with people who thought that they were great multitaskers, and they actually took them and did different things. And what they found is that really only about 1% of the population is a good multitasker. A lot of people just think because they can do multiple things at once and survive, that means they're a good multitasker. Now, it's important to keep in mind that I'm not talking about doing a lot of things that involve different parts of the brain. So for instance, absolutely, you can like march in place and stir a pot of pasta sauce and talk on the phone to your sister, because those are all using different parts of the brain. So yeah, you're multitasking, but they're all using different parts of the brain. However, reading a book and listening to a movie and having an IM conversation with a friend are all using the same parts of the brain. You can't do those well all at the same time. You can't. You're going to read the book poorly, you're going to be a bad friend because you're not really going to be listening to them, and then you're going to miss most of the important parts of the movie. So things that use the same parts of the brain, nope, you really just can't. A lot of people unfortunately find this out when they're trying to text and drive, because you need the same parts of the brain to drive and to text, and they crash. But sometimes there's what we call multitasking blinders, when we think we can do something, and unfortunately, a lot of times the thing that wakes us up to realizing we can't is when we get in a car wreck or we injure somebody else or something, and all of a sudden we realize, oh, I really actually wasn't paying attention. I really actually wasn't able to do those. So I hope we all recognize that before anybody else gets injured because of that. But because really you cannot use the same parts of the brain for different tasks at the same time. The capacity for self-reflection is being replaced by continuous spontaneous communication and texting. So unfortunately, this is something we really see. We really see a whole generation of people that are growing up with the inability to sit with themselves and just reflect. Unless they're given direction or a specific task, like do this thing, they don't have that ability to just sit with themselves and reflect and think deeply about something. And that's again what we're seeing as a core connection to text. Tech. Now, I'm not saying that this is direct and this is only because of this, but we are seeing this increase as tech usage increases. So if you find that you're a person who can't really sit with yourself very much and just have a lot of self-reflection, maybe try cutting down on your tech usage. Compulsive connection condition the brain for constant distraction and dopamine hits. I alluded to this earlier, right? So this is like the quick little text that you get from somebody and you feel that like gush of yay, or like clicking on that link and seeing that video pop up. All those little things are little dopamine hits, and they really teach our brain to be ready to be constantly distracted. Instead of knowing how to just focus on something, we're constantly like waiting for that other little thing to pop up. If you've ever talked to somebody who really well, probably actually most people nowadays, right? You're talking to them and they hear their text go ding, and they can't not check their text. They have to. It's like they don't literally have to, but they feel like they have to. And so something I actually do is I usually turn my phone off so that the ringer's not on, or I turn it on airplane mode. And if it's not on those, if the ringer actually is on and a text goes off, I actually purposefully do not look at my text for several minutes, because I'm wanting my brain to know, yeah, we're not just going to respond to a bell and stop doing whatever we were doing. That's not happening. I want my brain to continue to focus deeply and not be super easily distracted because a little thing goes beep. As few as 9 minutes of SpongeBob can lead to aggressive behavior after the program is stopped. So this was just one, actually there have been a couple studies that actually show this, but the reason I really bring this up is that tech has some effects on us that I wouldn't have guessed, that seem a little bit wow, right? So just 9 minutes can have an impact on aggressive behavior. Okay, daycare. So longitudinal research. So this is research that follows a group and follows it through time. So maybe like follows one group of kids that were in preschool and follows them until they're like 35 years old. So it follows them over time. Longitudinal research has shown the raising children, that raising children using daycare leads to behavioral and social problems. So children who are raised by daycare have more behavioral and social problems. We see a lot of parents in denial about whether or not they're raising their kid or the daycare is raising their kid. And so the general just way is if somebody that you pay is a non-related family member, somebody that you pay is with your children for more than 50% of their waking hours, then that is considered that they're raised by a daycare. If they're spending more than 50% of their waking hours with you, with family members, then it's considered that they're not raised by daycare. And one of the reasons this is developed, and one of the reasons it says waking hours, is because you'll sometimes run into parents who will say, well, I spend 12 hours a day with my kid, and the daycare spends 12 hours a day with my kid, so it's half and half. And I'll say, well, how many of those hours that you're with your kid are they awake? Well, 2. Well, okay, so you spent 2 hours of the day with your kid. How many of those hours awake was the daycare with your kid? Well, they were awake for 8. Okay, so if the daycare was awake with your kid when they were awake for 8 hours a day, and you were awake 2 hours a day, like, you know, that really shows, right, that daycare had 4 times greater impact on your kid's life that day. And unfortunately, the weekend, which some parents try to like make up for those hours, it doesn't work that way, right? Because it still had 5 days of being raised by daycare. And so if you look at it over the whole week, this child still spent more waking hours with the daycare than they did with their family. So that's just a way to think of it. If a kid is being raised by a daycare, they're spending more than half of their waking hours a week in a 7-day week period with somebody who's being paid to take care of them. So yeah, research has shown that children raised in daycare tend to be more aggressive, more demanding of their parents, more disobedient. A lot of times parents will have a lot of guilt about daycare, so they will give in to a lot of things and not hold the line and discipline as much as parents who are not raising their kid with daycare. Research also indicates they have poor work habits. Again, there is some question about the etiology of this, like where does this originate from? Is this because a lot of stuff is just given to them in daycare so that they won't cause a problem because they just need all the kids to just kind of not be problems? Is this because the parents do a lot more things for them out of guilt? I mean, where it originates, not really known, but these trends are noticed. These trends have been researched. Research also indicates that children raised by daycare tend to have less self-control. They tend to have the ability less to calm themselves, to soothe themselves in healthy ways. They might have the ability to push it down and to not show a physical reaction, but then it'll often come out another way, like biting their sister or potty problems or something like that. So they tend to have less self-control, be able to control themselves, calm themselves in ways that are healthy, less than children raised by family. Okay, so practicing roles and deferred imitation. So this is just another thing that is a piece of lifespan development. And a lot of people will say, well, this only applies to little kids, but that's not really true. Now, absolutely, we think of it more with little kids. That's true. But really, if you think about it, it applies over the whole lifespan. Okay. So I don't know if you guys can see this, but this is like the first Barbie doll. And one of the weird things, right, about Barbie doll is that her reputation has kind of changed. When Barbie first came out, she was, she was the first doll introduced, marketed to females that wasn't directly about being a mother. Now, of course, our toys for girls have completely flipped, kind of, and it's like it's bad if you encourage your daughter to pretend to be a mother. That's some of the messaging of our society nowadays. However, I think the joke's on them because, little girls will turn a chainsaw, a little plastic toy chainsaw. They'll turn that plastic toy chainsaw into their baby. They'll wrap it in a blanket and that'll be their baby. And the little boy will come over and take it and like whack down the forest. It's just so interesting. You just can't change the nature. But now Barbie is like, sometimes people look at her as not being feminist, right? Not being pro-woman, when really she was started as a very feminist ideal. So dolls, playing houses and soldiers, those are kind of like the typical toys of the past. They were real objects that kids really played with. And now a lot of that has been replaced with computers and texting and these digital things that aren't really things you touch and interact with and learn how to manipulate, right? They're just things you touch and move, right? And that's a very, very different skill set. And it drastically underdevelops the brain. All right, so we talked about that. 1959, Barbie was introduced. So something that's important is that role models aren't optional. So sometimes people think, oh, I don't really have a role model. But the thing is, you do. You can't not have a role model. Because of how we're developed socially as creatures and how our brain develops, you can't not have a role model. Now, you might not have purposely chosen them. You might not really be aware of who they are, but you have role models. You do. You have role models for, oh, this is why I do this thing the way I do. I'm not really sure why. It could be a book you read, a movie you saw, a news anchor. It could be your 5th grade teacher. It could be your mom. It could be your Sunday school teacher. It could be, right? There's so many different people it could be. But role models are not an option. Everybody has role models. And so then the question really is, have you purposely chosen who they will be? Are you aware of who they will be? Do you actually like following that model? Or have you just kind of fallen into it because you were just looking at them and just kind of doing what they were doing without really thinking about it? So, common role models: parents, siblings, celebrities, I would say unfortunately, teachers, historical figures, and also fictional characters. And I really also often think that fictional characters gets underestimated for the role model thing. I remember when I was little, Anne of Green Gables was totally a role model of mine, right? Okay, so Kohlberg talked about morality. He talked about the development of morality, which a lot of times you don't think about morality when we think about development. We're thinking about the cognitive, the social, the physical, but we're not as much thinking about morality as an element. Well, Kohlberg did think about it. So, pre-conventional morality, stage 1 or 2. This is typically when we think of younger kids, very interested in punishment, and then focus on reward. What will I get? Conventional morality is when they're really focused on, will I be seen as a good boy, good girl for doing this? And then stage 4, law and order, black and white, rigid, concrete. And then there's post-conventional. So this is stage 5, which is the social contract, right? Which is recognizing that I'm not just going to do something because the law says I should or shouldn't. I'm going to do it because it's the right thing. I'm going to treat my neighbor as I would want to be treated. And then universal ethical principles. Universal ethical principles say, even if somebody else doesn't like this, I think that this needs to be done. So for instance, people during World War II who went against their neighbors and fought so that the Jews in the town would not be taken away and imprisoned and tortured and burned burned alive in furnaces. The people who took a stand and said, no, I'm not going to let you do this to my Jewish neighbors. I'm not a Jew, but I'm not going to let you do this to my Jewish neighbors because it's wrong to treat people that way. Their neighbors were mad at them. Their neighbors didn't like them taking a stance because it made their life uncomfortable and it rocked the boat. But that would be a universal ethical principle that they were holding to. And what they said is, it doesn't matter how other people feel about this. It's wrong to do these things to a human being. To burn them alive in a furnace, to take everything from them, to strip them naked and put them on trains, that is not okay to do to a human being. I'm going to stand up and I'm going to say something, and I don't care if you guys get mad at me. That would be them defending a universal ethical principle. Nowadays, unfortunately, we have people who are defending universal ethical principles, and they're okay with people getting mad at them and doing things, but it's because of things that, everybody should have a Gucci handbag. Oh, there are people in the world who don't have a Gucci handbag. Well, therefore I'm gonna, and that's when the things like that, maybe that's a universal ethical principle they're doing, maybe, or it could be actually that they're still back in like this stage 3 and they want to be seen as a good boy or a good girl in the lens of somebody who really cares about Gucci handbags, right? So just because somebody will make somebody else mad or stand up for a principle and not care how it impacts other people, that does not necessarily mean that they're standing up for a universal ethical principle in stage 6. It could very easily mean they're in stage 3 or maybe even stage 2, and they're wanting to look good to a certain group of people, and that's the reason that they're doing what they're doing. Okay, attachment styles. We're going to talk about this very briefly, but I think it's important to just kind of cover this. Secure attachment. When they did the strange situation experiment, the mom left the room with the young child and then came back. And a child who securely attached to mom explored the room a little bit, was distressed when the mom left. Not overly so, but distressed, and happy when the mom returned. A child had insecure avoidant attachment, explored the environment a little bit when mom left, didn't have very much distress when the mom left, kind of like, yeah, whatever. And then when she came back, kind of avoided her. Didn't really, whatever, you're back now, you left, whatever, you're back. Insecure ambivalent attachment, the child did not explore the environment when the mom left, had high levels of distress when the mother left, and clings to dramatically or very much pushes away the mom when she returns. Insecure disorganized, was confused when the mom left and returned, didn't really understand what's going on. This doesn't seem clear to me. Was disoriented and overwhelmed, and really didn't have a consistent way of coping with how they felt. They didn't consistently suck on their thumb and that helped them feel better, or consistently find a stuffed animal and hug it. They didn't have a consistent way of coping. They were kind of just flailing about with everything, confused, unsure, not knowing what to do. Okay, parenting styles. So, there's 2 parenting styles that sound very familiar, but they're very different. So, authoritarian is demanding. They expect and question obedience. They're not responsive to the children's desires, and they communicate poorly. So this is kind of, if you think about it, if parents are acting like they're drill sergeants, you will do this, you will not talk back to me, you will do it immediately. Like, that's authoritarian. It will happen. You are not allowed to question. It will happen immediately. That's authoritarian. Authoritative is still demanding, but they set rational limits for the children, and they communicate with them. So this would be, this is what you're going to do. Okay, so let's talk about what you're confused by. Okay, I can understand how you see it that way. Yep, we're still doing it this way. Okay, now this is what you need to do. Right? So that's the difference between authoritarian, which is not a parenting style that leads to a good, secure attachment, and authoritative, which has consistently been shown to be the best parenting style to lead to secure attachment. You want to be demanding. You want to have set expectations. You want to set rational limits. And you want to communicate with them. Permissive, kind of do whatever you want. Oh, you want that new pony? Oh, let's get that little new pony right. Any little thing your heart desires, let's get it right away. That's permissive. And uninvolved, whatever, you kind of do your own thing. Yeah, you're cool, I'm cool, yeah, whatever, we'll just live together in the same house. That's uninvolved. So, absolutely, hands down, this one, and this one are not parenting styles that lead to secure, healthy, successful individuals. Authoritative, there's really no research that disagrees with this. I encourage you guys to look into yourself if you're convinced otherwise. Thinking. So these are just 2 brief things about thinking, how we think. So there's theory of mind, which is understanding the mental, emotional states of both ourselves and others. And there's metacognition, the knowledge that people have about their own thinking processes and their ability to monitor their cognition. So these are very similar, but here's the difference. So theory of mind is understanding, oh yeah, that's how I am. Oh, and that's how you are. Oh, so it's recognizing the 2 people, or the different people interacting, how the different people would feel and think about a situation. Metacognition is just the knowledge that people have about their own thinking process and their ability to monitor their cognition. So metacognition would be you thinking about what you think and monitoring what you think. Theory is recognizing that you have those things and other people have those too. Okay, so Erik Erikson, huge in development. So again, this is just another breakdown that he gave of the life stages. And then this is the psychosocial crisis that he has for every stage. In each psychosocial crisis is resolved either positively or negatively. So for infants, it's trust versus mistrust, then toddlers, autonomy versus shame and doubt, preschool, initiative versus guilt. So you can see all the different psychosocial crises. And if they're resolved successfully, the virtue that's developed, and for infants would be hope, the virtue that's developed, if it's successfully resolved for toddlers, would be will, so on and so forth. Okay, so I'm going to put the link for this video up so you guys can watch this video. This is another little short video. I hope you guys will find it engaging to watch for this week. And then these are just some of the references for you guys to see this week. Well, I hope this format worked better for you guys. Let me know if it did or didn't. I'm willing to try out new things to try to find something that works best for all you guys. Have a good week.